Give me but a moment to answer your questions. I had 5 individuals that responded. Thank you very much for your questions, all of you, especially Andy. What's up, buddy? All right, let's just start at the top. Which parts, this is by Joshua H. He asked, which parts of Tyrahs are you most excited about? And what UA content do you wish was in Tyrahs? First, let me address the latter part there. As far as UA content, I don't know a whole lot about it, so I'm going to just leave that one alone. I will do the best I can to cover some kind of a video where I talk about Unearthed Arcana content and its place in 5th edition, what things should be made official and otherwise. I'm a dungeon master, and most of the time it's my players that will dabble into the UA stuff. And the way I kind of handle UA content is my players deal with all of that, and then if there's something that they're really keen on or they really like, being that it's unofficial, they'll bring it up to me and say, hey buddy, there's something in UA that I just read last month and I'm really liking this kind of arc that the druid is going down. Can I play that? And then that's when I'll dabble into and look at it. But I don't know a whole lot about the UA content, so I can't compare and contrast what's currently out there and what was not included into Tyrahs. So apologies, Joshua, on that second part of the question. But as I said, I'll do the best I can to kind of talk through that in a different video. But the first part, which parts of Tyrahs are you most excited about? I think I enjoy and I'm most excited about all of the class and subclass options. There's a wealth of content there. And I'm really big on player agency. I talk about often how you always want to try and get yourself to a point where you're comfortable as a storyteller, as a dungeon master, and you're comfortable in your preparation and your world building, where you learn to say yes to your players more than no. And if another option, especially official, is something that would afford my players a better opportunity to flesh out the story they have for their character, I'm all for it. Let me pull away just a moment and talk a little bit about the house rule versus official nature. As a dungeon master, and I'm going to start creating quite a few videos on this, I really want to illustrate to all of you, to prospective dungeon masters, to current dungeon masters, veteran and especially new ones though, that D&D at its core is about doing it your way, finding what fits best within your group and your table, and figuring things out on your own. D&D back in the day didn't have any websites and builders that you can go to for reference points. Right? We didn't have just a plethora of options available at our fingertips. And if your ranger was not correct, you didn't have a Reddit forum that you can go to, or an Unearthed Arcana forum where the community has already created 900 different versions of their own ranger that you can pull from. No, what it was is you would just sit back and think through, how do I best answer my players' questions? How do I handle this issue that my player's having with a certain ability or a certain skill or a certain weapon? And you made it yourself. You drew the picture yourself. You made your own weapons. You had no community, so to speak, that you can bounce it off of to see if it was good, bad, or otherwise. The only community you had to test as sort of a proving ground for your content was your own player group, or maybe your other friends in high school that were playing in a different gaming group. That was all you had. So it was a very do-it-yourself, DIY, not community, but a very build-it-yourself sort of atmosphere. And you can certainly make your own subclasses, make your own races, make your own versions and variants on the currently existing stuff. But when it's official, when it's in a book as Tyrahs, it just gives it a very efficient place for me to point my players and say, you know what? Here's the official content on it. Here's the central location where you want to go if one of the subclasses from Xanathar's or Player's Handbook doesn't fit for you. Here's one more official book that you can look into to find some options for the class or the subclass that you might be leaning into. So I'm most excited about Tyrahs offering that. Just more options if my player has an idea for a character, but the current subclasses or classes in the currently existing stuff doesn't quite fit. So that's definitely what I'm most excited about. Okay? Anonymous. Thank you very much for your comment and your question here. Would you make a campaign diary for a campaign that has already ended? The answer is yes. I believe there's more value in journaling and creating a diary for a currently existing campaign or whatever campaign you're currently running. But why I might make a diary for one that's already ended is more for reminiscing, for nostalgia, so that I can look upon that much later. The other interesting thing is when you're creating a diary or creating a journal for a campaign that's already ended, you've kind of seen the whole story arc, the whole story. So you've seen the beginning, middle, and the end. You know how this story turns out. And that can be somewhat interesting as you're writing it or typing it and reflecting upon the choices that were made by the players, the decisions that your DM, or maybe you, if you're the DM, that you've made, and so on. So there is definitely some value in that. And when I say reminiscing and more for kind of stamping that memory in place, I just think back with how many campaigns I've played over 40 years, and I wish I would have created a diary or journaled campaigns 35 years ago. So I can kind of just lean into it and just latch on to that memory of that character and that sword that they got from that one creature that they fought in that one dungeon. Yes, there's, some areas where in my mind I can kind of spark those memories and recall those things, but having a diary does that for you, right? It gives you, they always say in sort of the creative world, journaling is a good way, and maybe this might be the best way to sort of answer this question. It's a good way to take all of that creativity, put it down into paper, and it just frees up that space in your mind to create more good content because you have a trusted source that you can go to refer to that if you want to kind of look back on those ideas again. So I think there is some value in that. Now, what I was talking about in the beginning, where I believe there's more value in creating a diary, sort of a session-by-session diary, or just definitely taking notes and journaling, is because you can look at the previous diary entry, the previous session, and use that to help shape the preparation for your upcoming session. And what that does by having a diary in sort of a written place where you're tracking session by session, it helps you to create sort of a flow chart to the campaign, which really leads a lot into creating some consistency and some detail where you can refer back to something that happened 9-10 sessions ago. So I think there's a little more value in journaling and taking notes as you're playing it. But again, if you want to reminisce and look back on all the fondness of it, it's definitely worthwhile if you see fit. There's no right or wrong answer here. Just, if you're really excited about this, I don't see anything wrong with creating a diary for a campaign that's already ended. And then the second part, or the second question you have is, what was your most exciting moment as a DM? This is a difficult one. I can't pinpoint a specific thing. I've done this. There's so many memories. There's so many instances that really kind of come to the forefront when I think of it. But I think, for me, the essence of being a dungeon master, the essence of D&D, just playing any tabletop role-playing game, so RPGs, not even D&D, is sitting among good people, right? Spending time with people that maybe I won't see otherwise, especially these days with everyone with families. And I'm not talking about COVID, but just, they've got their own lives and jobs and full-time jobs. And it's not as easy as it was to get everyone together as it was when we were 15 years old or 16 years old in high school. We just have more responsibility now. So for some of my friends, if I don't play D&D with them at the table or, virtually, I won't see them. So for me, the essence of D&D is sitting down with just good people. So for me, the most exciting moment I had is, I think, my very first campaign when 5th edition came out. My Eberron campaign, which is my current one, I believe, is my 6th consecutive campaign in 5th edition. But my very first one, when 5th edition came out, so this began somewhere the last half, right? Whenever 5e came out, so the latter part of 2014, I think. That's the first campaign, and it's the first edition of D&D that both my wife and my son played with me. I've done a few one-shots and quick adventures to kind of give an example of what D&D was to family and friends and stuff like that. And my wife has jumped in for some quick one-shot games. But to really sit down and commit, this is the first time ever in all of and I've been with my wife for 30 years almost. This is the first time ever that both my wife and my son have sat down with me at the table. And they've played in all 6. They're currently in my Eberron one, so they've been a part of 5 campaigns already, and they're currently in the 6th one that I'm running, of course. So I think for me that's the most exciting moment, just because it was really looking across the table and feeling like the people I care about most are taking part in something that's very important to me. So that's definitely an exciting moment. Now, where I think you may have been going with this was if I can pinpoint sort of an in-game kind of a thing. There was a fight that the person I'm going to go into next here, Andy, that created that has some of the questions for me. Andy Cates down there in the comments is one of the players in my game, and he's a brother to me. He's a lifelong friend. He's been gaming with me for the better part of 25 years. There was an old 3rd edition campaign that Andy was in. We had only 3 players. There was a half-orc, a monk, a half-orc barbarian, a monk, a human monk, I think, and a rogue. I think he might have been a gnome. But there was only 3 players, and it was a 3rd edition campaign, and I don't remember the exact details. This is where, going back to the first part of your question, Inna, which is I should have diaried this. I should have journaled and stamped this entire campaign so I can refer back to these things. But there was a big boss fight coming up against a frost giant by the name of Agnarakis. And I remember the PCs slid down. They kind of just took like a frozen water slide, if you will, down into the lair. And there are just so many moving parts. And it was so exciting for me, that combat, because it was, and mind you, this is 3rd edition, so this is like 20 plus years ago. I did not have the experience, the knowledge. I wasn't as good of a dungeon master as I am now. But it was everything I had to create that boss fight. And there was just, I think the excitement of it was, there was just so much that led up to that moment. There was so much talk about Agnarakis, the frost giant. The named frost giant of the north, and he was the big bad boss. And I feel like the excitement was there just because it was kind of like when I had him step out and I tried to use voices and, roar, and he just stomped his foot down and ice, shattered and broke, and you can just hear this crack. And it's like the crack just sort of snuck its way and was just snaking its way, making, a beeline right towards the players. And they were on sort of unstable ground and their footing wasn't quite steady. And then, they heard the shh as he took the axe and just sliced it and basically sharpened it, and they can just see the frost come off of that axe and just all of this coolness to it. And when I said sort of that roll initiative moment, it was kind of just, just hair raising, the tension of, oh my gosh, this is him. This is it. It's here. And I think the excitement there was just, just how epic the fight was. I think I dropped the whole group. I mean, it was, they got back. It was just this elaborate, just so many moving parts. They were really high level, but this guy was not just a frost giant like pulled from the monster manual. I gave him different levels, and 3rd edition was notorious for this type of stuff, and stats and all kinds of moving parts. And it was just this epic battle, but it was just more to the point of, here he is. We finally heard about, it's like when you meet Strahd for the first time. So for me, I can't say that's the most exciting moment. It's just the one that comes to mind right now, was this big frost giant epic battle against the frost giant boss named Agnarakis. And if I just mention, obviously Agnarakis is a name that doesn't bring up and conjure up much, it doesn't relate to anything else in the real world. So when you hear that, when I bring that up to any one of those 3 players, and I play with all 3 of them today. And this was early 2000, late 90s, I think. When I bring up Agnarakis, I just say, hey, Agnarakis. Everyone remembers, with quite a bit of detail, all the little moving parts that led up to that. So that's definitely a very exciting moment for me. Andy Cates, there he is. Andy was one of the ones that fought Agnarakis. He asks, what are your top 10, or however many you want to go through, 5e homebrew rules? Very good question. The interesting thing about this is all of these answers and homebrew rules, that's a tongue twister, that I come up with, Andy is quite privy to because they apply to him. He's one of the players in all of my campaigns. And he's been through all and is currently in my fifth edition game. There's a bunch here. I don't have cloaks of displacement do not exist in my world. I'm really big on paying a lot of attention to the whole advantage disadvantage mechanic. And I just don't like I think the item is way too powerful. It's sort of a must-have, and it can be kind of game-breaking for me. So that's my top 10. It's hard to say, top 10, are they my favorite homebrew rules? Because I believe the essence of the homebrew, the rules you put in place, they don't always have to be your favorite. They just need to be the things that will help you capture the essence of the game you want best. Let's say I have a real gritty one where I think it's called gritty realism in the DMG, right? Or maybe even the player's handbook. I think it is a DMG variant where like long rest is 24 hours and a short rest is 8 hours, right? And maybe you have this rule in place where if you die, there's no resurrection. Doesn't exist. Things like this. Does that mean that's my favorite? No, but I may use it a lot if I want a real grim, dark sort of setting and that feel to the campaign, right? So the top 10, I think, for me is more of which ones do I notice keep coming back, whether I'm playing in Ravnica, Eberron, my own world, a one-shot, whatever. Which are the homebrew rules that I like to use? We have not used Cloaks of Displacement. They've been out of the game for a long time. Another one that's sort of a takeaway is the Lucky Feat has been removed. Anything that kind of feels like a must-have for me that all players are kind of a fool for not taking, I want to eliminate that. So that one is one that I use a lot. One that I use a lot that is among my favorites is I think it's Chris Perkins's critical rule, where you deal max damage and then you roll dice. So for example, say the total of your weapon and sneak attack damage is a 3d6. If you crit, you're going to automatically deal 18 damage, then you roll the dice and add that all together. And of course, add your, strength or dexterity, whatever. And up until this recent campaign in Eberron, that crit rule applied to both players and DMs. So all of my monsters as well. My players still use that crit rule in our Eberron campaign, but I have gone to rolling double the dice. And the reason why I use that rule and why I like the max damage, then roll dice is it really adds an epic feel to it. No matter, even though you're grabbing double the handful of dice, if you roll a bunch of 1s and 2s on your d6s, your crit can sometimes come out doing less damage than a above average normal hit. And I never want that to be the case. I don't use lingering injuries or, permanent damage or disablements or disabilities, crippling and stuff like that. So for me, the crits really have a lot of heft to them. And surprisingly, I don't think there has been a single champion in any of my campaigns, though I use that rule. So that's one of my favorites as well. What are some other of my top 10? I can't define one specific rule, but I always like to play around with sort of the hit point mechanic. I believe the resting thing is a little bit wonky in that it's very arcadey in that you get back too much too quickly. It's too easy to heal to full. And I understand so much of it is based around a very broken system to me, which is the whole 5 to 8 combats per day. Let's understand, folks, that I play with 8 to 10 players. I have not had less than 8 players in my D&D, in my 5th edition D&D yet. So say I've got on average 9 players and then me, and I'm running, an orc boss and 4 orcs. I've got 5 dudes and then I have 9 players. Each round, there's 14 turns we have to go through. Let's now ramp that up, and I'll get into that when I go into Nicholas's question, to high-level gameplay where your fighter has 3 actions or 3 attacks per round. 15 to 20 actions per turn or per round. That's unwieldy. My combats take an hour and a half, even if it's a relatively simple, not a lot of moving parts. So for me to have 5 to 8 combats per day, that's what we're doing the whole session. My players would probably be okay with that, but I like to have some more ample time for social and exploration. So to me, the whole 5 to 8 system is wonky. Therefore, the whole thing of like long rest, get your health all back. I don't mind, and of course, I'll give my players all the stuff they should get back where, your action surge or something like that. It tells you at the end of a short or long rest, you get this back. You get these charges back at the end of a long rest. You get all your spell slots back at the end of a long rest. But I like to always find some sort of house rule that maybe you don't get all of your hit dice back as indicated in the player's handbook when you spend them during a rest. Maybe you need to actually find a tavern or be in an actual safe place. Something that you don't need to roll survival for to see if it's dangerous. You don't need to even have people on watch or on guard duty. Just some place where you as the player can ask me, hey DM, can I tell, like just off the cuff real quick, are we going to be able to get a long rest here? And I'll tell them, yeah, you can. But if it's in the dungeon, if it's in the wildlands, if there's any chance that I might roll a random encounter, I oftentimes play with house rules that kind of weave into that a little bit, where it's like, you need to be in a very special place to be able to get your long rest. I'll give you everything back if you long rest, but I like keeping the danger element at all times. And even though, like I said, I don't use lingering injuries and crippling and disabilities and stuff like that, I like the PCs to feel that they may be, you had a really rough epic battle against the dragon last night, 9 hours, 10 hours ago. You wake up in the morning a little beaten and battered from that. You're not just healing to full. So I always kind of weave into house rules that work through those sort of mechanics, or things that maybe just minimize like hit point bloat, which I'll let you guys look up on your own, especially high level characters, where everyone has, with 8 players and everyone 140 hit points. I've got 1,000 hit points I have to churn through in combat before, they're all squished and dead. So house rules that work into those type of things that just make you feel a little more vulnerable after you've had a really rough go of things. Okay. So there's some house rules there. I know that's not 10, but there's a few there that I'm quite fond of that I use often. I'm going to go and address his bonus question here. Is there a rule or rule set from previous editions that you would like to see make a comeback for the next iteration of D&D? So for 6th edition, I like, and I know it's a variant into DMG, I like the flanking rules. I really do. I'd kind of like to see, so let me talk about the ones I'd like to see. I like the flanking rules. I believe monsters, and maybe just giving that to the players. Monsters, I think, have things such as pack tactics and whatnot. So keep the flanking rule simple. We don't have to have all these circumstance bonuses +2 and whatnot. Just you either get advantage or you don't. But I really like the flanking rules. I love the minions concept from 4th edition. Kind of the glass cannon. They've got all their moving parts. They have all their traits, all their abilities. They can do all the wonderful things that the monster can do, like pack tactics. Maybe there's some sort of command option that, as a bonus action, this guy can do, and when he activates that, all the other allies can take a reaction to attack you, sort of off turn. But that guy just has 1 hit point, which is basically to say, these guys are threatening to you. If you've got 8 goblins all at 1 hit point, and they can all, as a reaction, whenever you move more than 20 feet in your turn, and I'm inventing this, they can shoot from ranged, that's a problem. Your PCs need to devote a tank or, a damage dealer. Go deal with that. But they're even best handled with like AE, right? The wizard shines here. Like, dude, drop a fireball behind that cover and kill those guys. As long as you do some damage to them, they only have 1 hit point. I don't need to track it. The elegant thing about that is I don't have to bog myself down with those things. I can really focus on the boss and all of his hit points and armor class. The mooks, or the minions, you devote any attention to them and you're successful on your die roll, they're gone, they're removed. But you do have to pay attention to them. It gives me that freedom. So I love the 4th edition minion concept. I want to see that. I would also love to see flanking. Another one I want to see is some sort of handling, and you can maybe comment, Andy, for me, or someone else. I don't remember which one this comes from, if at all. But I swore in previous editions of D&D there was a lot more elegance with skills. And what I mean by that is, in 6th edition, skills need to sort of level up. I know your proficiency bonus goes up, right? And I know like certain classes, might get more more expertise, where you get to pick another skill now that you can have double proficiency bonus, right? And I know your stats will go up, ASIs, but the use of your skill, your stealth, your survival at level 20 feels the same as it does at level 1. Your success rate changes, but that's still dependent on the DM, right? Like at level 1, what does failing a survival check mean to me, to my players when I explain it? Does it mean that they thought they were going to get a long rest, like I was just talking about, but now they're not because they didn't sufficiently find that their campsite has tracks circling it, as though something is obviously, eyeballing the area? Is that what failure on survival means? Okay, well, let's fast forward to survival at level 20. You make a survival check to see if your camp is good to go. Obviously, by that point, you're probably dropping more than Canaan's Mansion, but still. I can still have failure mean the same thing, right? Maybe my DC gets higher. But you'll notice how skills just kind of stagnate. A level 20 fighter with all of, Battlemaster options and riposte and all of their tactical options and their hit points and the weapons and the magic items they have and 5 attacks per round and what they can do with their bonus actions if you're a rogue at level 20 is vastly different than a rogue at level 1. But your acrobatics check doesn't feel that different from level 7 to level 19. So I'd like to see something, if there was something in an earlier edition of D&D that just allows more heft and meat to skill checks. So those would be my ones that I'd like to see moving in. Thanks again, Andy, very, very much. All right, here we go. Nicholas, do you have a homebrew setting, and how is it? Nicholas, yes, I do. It's called Silberat. I'm going to leave it there for the most part. I'm currently working on a 150 to 200 page The World. I'm working on the World book right now. It will be offered to everyone, not just YouTube subscribers and people on Patreon or otherwise. It's going to be offered to the world 100% for free. Downloadable as a full-blown PDF. It's going to be PDF format only. There's some high-level professional artwork in there. Some of the art is high level, but some of it stylistically is somewhat inconsistent because I'm using many different artists. But the quality is top-notch, and that's why the book is going to be released for free, because they all gave me permission. I've talked to them in depth to use these pieces of art in this book, so long as I use it for non-commercial use, of course, right? And I mean, I'm talking about art directors for Bethesda and Valve and, people that have already drawn for Wizards of the Coast and things like this. So I'm currently creating that. It's a fabulous world. I think right here on screen, I'll pop up a map of my world, Silberat. I've run my D&D group through this world already. We've played from levels 1 through 17, I think. So we've spent a good year and a half, 2 years in this world. When I bring it up and I mention certain adventures or locations, many of the players at my table are quite fond of it. They think the world is pretty detailed. And I have since created, I probably had 30% of it done when we were running it. Like I was creating it as we played, right? During my prep time. I have since put in more work, and I'm hoping to release this world by the end of the year. So coming up within a month, basically, is the goal. I've got 40, 50, I'm probably a third of the way through right now, but I keep reworking the editing of it, like the layout, the design, what I want to convey, so on and so forth. But I think you'll be quite fond of it, every one of you, not just you, Nicholas. It's called Silberat. I think it's a fabulous, obviously it's my baby. It's a fabulous world. I think it can stand toe-to-toe, if not above, everything that's out there. Honestly, I'm that passionate about it, but also the delivery, the presentation. If you like any of the ways that I sort of feel which books, official books, are valuable to me, how do I want information presented to me as a DM? It leans very heavily towards how would I want information conveyed to me as someone that would be interested in running this world. I'm not trying to be Tolkien here or C.S. Lewis. I'm not creating my own Middle-earth or Narnia and just telling you a story. I'm creating a world that's intended to be used for gameplay. So the approach, I think, is going to be quite different than what you've read in Eberron Rising from the Last War, anything Forgotten Realms, Wildmount. It's just its own thing. It looks very typical, it's got mountains and forests, and there's no weird floating planets, not Planescape or something like this. You'll see. Just keep an eye out about a month from now. I'll give more updates if it's not done by then. Do you have tips for a high-level campaign, level 11 plus? I do. Remember, I come from a very unique situation in that I'm running 8 to 10 players. So high level, your character no longer just rolls a die. I missed. I'm done. Oh, I moved. Sorry. Okay, I moved 30 feet. I'm done. He goes. That's all you can do. At level 14, you have a lot of moving parts on your sheet. Imagine a Battlemaster fighter. Attacks. Imagine your wizard. He's got what, level 7 spells and down? That spell book, he's not just looking through one sheet anymore. He's looking through the whole book. So one thing I would recommend is when it comes to combat, find a timer. Whether an hourglass, a stopwatch, 30 seconds, 1 minute. Give each player a timer. Because analysis, paralysis, all that other stuff really ramps up at high level because they just have more to do. Their character sheets are becoming more complex. And one of the worst parts about options, as much as it's a good thing, like I talked about with Joshua's question on what I'm excited about with Tasha's, when a player has more options in combat, they tend to take longer because they're afraid that they're going to choose the wrong option. When you only have one thing to do and it doesn't work out, you're like, well, that's all I can do. But when you have 9 different pieces buttons you can push, and you push a button and you notice that damage just didn't do much. The monster seems to be resistant or immune to necrotic damage. That player's like, well, damn. There's like 9 other things I could have done. And they're going to remember that for their next turn. And they're going to start overthinking of all of these moving parts, of all of these buttons, which is the right one. So find some sort of a timer. Get them to keep your intensity and the pacing of your combat just as it is at level 1. Outside of combat, for social and exploration sort of stuff, make sure that you create consequences for the decisions that your group doesn't choose. Let me reword that in a better way. There's an option for your group to go left, and there's an option for your group to go right. If they go left, create something bad. Have the world keep moving, even when they're busy elsewhere and they're not privy to what's happening on the right. Have something bad at the world level, right? Because at high level campaigns, your PCs they're not just cleaning rats from the cellar. Maybe they are. They're doing some pretty complex things, right? They're doing some world-ending, campaign-changing stuff. They're shaping the arc of the world at this point. God-level things, and they're not just saving a person, they're saving a nation at this point, right? They're closing portals to planes, so on and so forth. You're at the back of the monster manual, right? Old school style, where the high CR stuff. So the moving parts, the world is moving at that same scale, at that same scope. So if they go left, the nation in the east is gone. Not a person that they may never run into. There aren't some guards, or even worse, you don't even mention what happened. They later find out because they've got the resources, right? They're scrying, a wizard teleports somewhere, a dragon flies in and lands, or a druid, and they end up at a grove, and it's like, I recognize this grove. Hold on. This is that one druid group, that druid circle, right? And then they're speaking druidic, and all of a sudden the druid's like, my friends, not but 3 weeks ago, the kingdom of Galador crumbled. The ancient dragons that you had forsaken, the one you cursed, dismissed, ignored, has laid waste. You get it. Create consequences. Because what it does now is, even though your PCs have more tools to handle the world's problems, they really, really hold on to, like, the world's problems all have a bunch of weight because they can't do everything at once, which then leads into, like old school, the paladin hiring henchmen, right? They now need to, when your PCs feel like they have all the tools because they're so high level, they can start to feel like they don't need the help anymore. They don't need the wizard. They don't need the gnome with his little flying ship anymore because they can fly themselves. They now have the Helm of Teleportation. I don't need the faction that has all the keys to unlock the Druid circles or the teleportation circles. I don't need people anymore. I don't just have a little tool bag at level 1. There's 6 players in your group, all level 11 or higher. They're walking around rolling husky tool chests at this point. They have all the tools. You have a wizard, a battlemaster fighter, and a rogue in your party at level 14. They have most of the tools they need to get into any dungeon, unlock anything, detect anything, use any level of magic, stand in front of any boss, right? But when you create consequences and plot lines throughout the world that are happening simultaneously, you bring about the necessity for your PCs to have to find someone to help them because they can't handle this situation anymore. So just focus on those 2 things for high-level campaign. Keep your combat fast and intense to minimize analysis paralysis, and have your world just constantly shifting and moving. Especially when you have it shifting and moving based on the actions of your players, but that snowball effect creates this trickle-down effect that they ignored this. There it is. Those are the answers to some really, really good questions. Thank you, everyone, for commenting. Joshua, Inna Imis, Andy, and Nicholas. Thanks, guys, so much for the questions. Wonderful questions. Joshua, like I said, I will do what I can. I'll look into this UA content stuff and kind of dabble into a little bit on some things that maybe I feel like should have been put into Tasha's and so on. But I do have a deep dive coming up on Tasha's where I really talk more subjectively. Not the spotlight that I already did, not another one. A lot more subjectively, on just my thoughts overall on Tasha's and how it plays out, what I might use, and so on. So maybe I'll kind of dabble into some of your, answer some of that question within that video. So there it is, folks. That's all I have. Thanks, everyone. Take care.